macabre, gruesome and horrifying, ghastly, of pertaining to, dealing with, or representing death, especially its grimmer or uglier aspect, of or suggestive of the allegorical dance of death. Prepare yourself for these macabre moments. I am Marie Samuels. He is Eric Altman, and welcome to the Halloween special of Macabre Moments. Tonight, we have some spooky stuff in store. It being that time of year, right? Where the goose, the ghosts, the spooks come out. So I thought we would start out by Eric actually is having some activity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been going on since we moved into the house.
Well, but I thought it quieted down for a while.
It did, but it comes in waves. It's weird. It like comes in waves of 3 or 4 things happen, and then it calms down again. Then a couple months later, it starts up and calms down. And it's been going on since 2017, since we moved in the house. And if you want me to go back that far and give you a summarized version of what happened, I can.
Do it.
All right, so my wife and I bought the house in 2017. It's in southwestern Pennsylvania, Hempfield Township, and it sits probably about 35, maybe 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. And it's a residential neighborhood, suburban neighborhood. We've got probably, I don't know, maybe 150, 200 houses in the neighborhood plan, about 10 or 15 streets. And it's your typical split-level ranch house. There's nothing fancy about it. We sit in the bottom of 2 hills, like on the street. There's houses on both sides of the street, but we thought it was a beautiful home. We were looking for a house to buy. My wife fell in love with it. So in 2017, we bought the house. We moved in, and it was literally while we were unpacking that the first incident happened. And my wife and son were actually at our old home packing up some boxes up there to bring down. And I was in the kitchen unloading silverware and utensils and stuff like that. And I heard a crash in one of the back bedrooms. And I thought it was maybe one of our cats. So I went back to look, thinking, oh, would they break or would they knock over? And I checked both bedrooms and nothing was knocked over. None of the boxes were tilted over. It was just this huge, loud crash. And it actually sounded like something broke. But I went back and investigated, and I saw nothing out of place, nothing wrong. And from that point on, things escalated pretty quickly. It went from that crash that happened literally the first couple of days we were here, to once we got settled in the house, about a week or 2 later, sleeping in bed, 3:30 in the morning, I would hear knocking on the wall. And it was usually be like 2 or 3 knocks, sometimes 5 knocks, but it would be loud enough that it would wake me up. And I'd sit up in bed thinking, okay, was somebody at the door? So I'd go out to the front of the house, walk down the steps, look out the front door, nobody's there. I go to the back door, nobody's there. And this repeated itself almost on a nightly basis, sometimes 2 or 3 times a night. My son has a habit of not sleeping during the night. He's a night owl, so he's up real late, usually up till 5 or 6 in the morning when he goes to bed, and he sleeps during the day. So one night I was sleeping, and I heard his bedroom door open and shut, and his bedroom's catty corner to ours in the hallway. So I just yelled out, "Josh, is that you?" and didn't hear anything. And I heard footsteps walk down the hallway, down the steps. And we have the steps to go down to a landing, turns to the left, and then goes down a second set of steps to the finished basement. And I heard them go down the steps, down the landing, down the second set of steps. And I heard the garage door, the door into the garage, open and shut. And I thought, that's kind of weird. So I yelled out again for Josh. He didn't answer. I got up and went over to his bedroom door. He's in bed sleeping that night. He went to bed early. I thought that was kind of strange. So I decided to go check out the footsteps I had heard. And I walked down the hall, down the steps, into the basement. And mind you, at that time, all the lights are off. I'm in the dark, just being real quiet, thinking, well, if it wasn't Josh, maybe there's somebody in the house. Mm-hmm. So I get down to the finished basement, the landing of the finished basement, and to the right is the garage door, the door that goes into the garage, and it was shut. So real quietly, I open the garage door and walk in, and all the lights are out in the garage. So I flick the light on for the garage and look around. There's nobody in there. The garage door itself, the main door for the garage, is down. I'm not hearing anything. None of the cats are up and moving around. So I'm thinking, man, that's really weird. So I turn around. As I turn around to shut the garage door light off and go out from the garage into the finished basement, all the lights are on in the finished basement. And I didn't turn them on. So that was my first indication that there was something really strange going on in our house. And again, the nightly knocking 3 or 4 times a night, sometimes 3 or 4 days a week, it would go on. It would wake me up continually. Several repeat occurrences of the footsteps down the hallway, down the steps into the garage. That went on for a while. TV started turning on by themselves.
Oh.
And we would be in the living room and our bedroom TV would come on. And I think, okay, well, maybe the cat stepped on the remote. So I go back to turn it off. The remote's in our nightstand drawer. So it wasn't a cat hitting the remote. I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe somebody has a remote nearby that would cause the TV to come on. So I turned the TV off with our remote, and I even took the batteries out of our remote, and the TV would still come on by itself. And then it started happening throughout the house and on different TVs. In the living room, the TV would turn on. I would shut it off. A few minutes later, it would come back on again. We were nowhere near the remotes. I'd be in the basement watching TV. It would shut off on its own. I'm thinking, okay, well, I didn't know I didn't touch the remote. I'd turn it back on. It would shut off again. So the TVs went on for a while, and we've had these TVs for a good number of years. So I know it wasn't, like a glitch or something with a remote. And there were multiple TVs that was going on. So that was kind of weird. And thinking, okay, well, maybe it had to do something with somebody, living nearby us that had a remote. Maybe they turned their TV on. It was affecting our TV. But we have
kind of
three
like
different.
Is beginning of Poltergeist.
Kind of, yeah. But we have 3 different brands of TVs. We have a RCA. We have 2 Vizios, and I think my son has a Zenith, one of the old Zenith TVs. And yeah, they're different brands of remotes. So
that doesn't explain it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it really didn't make much sense. Just weird little subtle things like that were happening in the house until we had 2 really disturbing things happen. And before I get to those, we were hearing voices in the house. I would hear somebody call my name. My wife would hear somebody call her name that sounded like me. Josh would hear me calling him. He'd go, "What do you want, Dad?" And I wasn't even here. I heard screaming in the garage several times, like it sounded like my son got hurt, like he dropped a hammer on his foot or yelled out in pain. I go look, and he wasn't in the garage.
What?
I go outside. He'd be out sitting on the back swing of the bench and on our back patio we have, like a little covered swing.
Right.
He'd be out there, on his phone. I'd be asking him, "Were you in the house?" "No." "Were you in the garage?" "No." "Did you scream?" "No." And he'd look at me like I was crazy.
Like, did you ask him, did you hear a scream?
Yeah. I said, "Did you hear anything?" "Nope."
Wow.
And he would always tell me, "You're hearing things, or you're dreaming it," or, and I thought maybe for a while, maybe I was half awake and dreaming it, and that would wake me up. But Kathy started hearing the knocking, and she heard the voices and the screaming too. She was in the basement, the finished basement we have, laying on the couch watching TV, and it's chilly down here. Right now it's about 65 degrees in our basement, and we have an electric fireplace down here. It's a gas fireplace, but it has an electric ignition start. She's laying on the couch, and she's thinking to herself out loud, "Man, it's really chilly down here. I should get a blanket or something." No sooner does she say that, she hears a click, and the electric fireplace turns on by itself.
Well, that's a helpful ghost.
Well, yeah, but this is where it becomes not a helpful ghost.
Okay.
I got pushed down the stairs. I had rotator cuff surgery on my shoulder, and it was about a month after my surgery. I still had my arm in a sling, and I was going through physical therapy, and we had a plumber come to the house to fix a problem we have with our toilet. And I was in the kitchen. I heard the knock at the door, and there's about 6 steps from our living room down to the first landing. And I see him standing at the door, and I said, "I'll be right down." So we don't have a banister on the left side of the stairs going down, but we have one on the right. So I'm using my right arm very gingerly to go down the steps. And I just stepped off the first step and felt an elbow or a hand or something give me a real hard nudge in the back that pushed me down the stairs. And I didn't want to fall face first down the steps because that was the way I was going. So I reached out with my right arm to try to brace myself, the one I just had surgery on, and stopped myself, but I fell on my back and slid down the steps and re-injured my right shoulder. Kathy got pushed down the steps as she was coming down the steps, and she tore her meniscus and ACL in her knee, and she
Is
just
that why
had that's why she had to have this arthroscopic surgery just this past couple weeks because of that injury 2 years ago.
Oh.
So it started becoming more aggressive, where it was like pushing us. And of course, we have Woody, our Pomeranian, and now we have Scrappy and Sparky. They bark at nothing. There's nothing down here, nothing they should be seeing, but they're looking at something and barking. They do it all the time. It was October of last year, October 17th, about 2:30 in the morning. All three of us were sound asleep, and we hear this huge crash in the basement, or I'm sorry, in the kitchen. And I thought, okay, well, maybe Percy, who was still alive at that time, or Woody may have knocked something over. One of the cats knocked something over. So I rolled over to Kathy. I said, you better go check that. She got up and went to the kitchen and checked. And I heard her say really loud, holy shit. And I that made me sit up in bed. And I heard Josh come out of his bedroom. He heard her, walked in the kitchen, and he said, holy shit. So I got up and started walking down the hallway to the kitchen thinking, okay, somebody spilled food on the floor or had an accident on the floor or something like that.
Or there's a giant spider, or
Yeah, something. But when I turned the corner, I was just blown away by what I had seen. Our kitchen cabinet that's on the wall when you first turn in the kitchen was literally ripped off the wall, dropped on the middle of the floor, and broken into about 8 pieces.
What?
And in the kitchen cabinet, the only thing we had that was heavy was a small crock pot. We had some cans of dog food and cat food, and we had a couple of glass and plastic Christmas cookie trays, or whatever you want to call them, plates. That's it. There wasn't anything heavy that should have caused that cupboard to come down off the wall. And if it would have dropped straight down like a cupboard would do if it fell, it would have left scuff marks and scrape marks on the cabinet, the shelf,
right.
the countertop. There was no scuff marks. There was no scrapes. And when I looked at the wall, all the nails and all the staples were completely straight out, like something had literally pulled the cabinet off the wall. They were not bent down. It was pulled out and dropped in the middle of the floor. And the way the cabinet was dropped, it wasn't dropped where it would fall with the cabinet doors facing down. It was pulled out, turned to its side, and dropped on its side and broke into a bunch of pieces. And it was a holy shit moment. I couldn't fathom how something like that could happen because those cabinets were securely attached to the wall. The part of the particle board where it was stapled to literally was ripped. You could see a big chunk ripped off of it. And I had several people look at it, and they were like, we have no idea why that would have come down, especially if the staples weren't bent or the nails weren't bent. They were straight out. So that was the first holy shit moment. The second holy shit moment happened probably in November of 2019. Again, sleeping about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I hear this humongous metallic crash in our garage. And I thought, oh my God, maybe the ceiling came down, or because our bedroom is literally right above the garage. I thought maybe a ceiling tile or wiring or something from the garage door came down. So I hurried up and rushed down the steps, down the second turn into the garage, opened the door, and I'm looking around and I don't see anything. I'm like, what the hell? I'm looking everywhere. There's nothing disturbed. I look in front of my son's car who's parked in the garage. Nothing on my workbench. I walk around to the back of the car, and on the back of the car sits this. And the only way you've probably seen the tractor style lawnmowers. We have a John Deere, and it has a very heavy, about 50 pound grass catcher bag that you attach to the back of that riding mower. And that riding mower bag was sitting on my bench, and I had planned on installing it on the mower. Well, somehow that riding mower grass bag, the catcher bag, moved from my bench up over my son's car about 20 feet to the opposite side of the car and hit the pavement, the garage floor, and made the huge crash.
What?
And I have no explanation of how it got from one side of the car, the front of the car on my bench, to the back of the car on the floor.
And there was no marks on the car?
There was no marks at all on the car. There still aren't any marks on the car.
That's so weird.
Yeah, it was like something picked it up and tossed it over the entire length of the car. Yep. And it was on the back side of the car on the floor. Um, since that time, I've left it on the back of the car. But we've had 6 paranormal groups in here. We've had 5 psychic mediums in here. Each group has had something happen to them in here with either K2 meters, EMF, flashlights, EVPs, knocking on the walls they've heard, lights flickering, that sort of thing. We've had different responses from the mediums that were in there. The clairvoyants told us different things. Some said that there's a family member here that's protecting us from something more dark and malevolent in the house, and it's keeping it at bay. Somebody told us, I can't remember who it was, someone told us that we have the spirit of a little girl in the house, and that little girl doesn't like me. That's why she knocks all night long and wakes me up almost every night. And as weird as it sounds, as I mentioned to you off air, this stuff would stop. It would go on for 3 or 4 months, and then all of a sudden it would just quit. And we wouldn't focus on it. We wouldn't pay attention to it. And then all of a sudden it would start up again. And it would go for a couple of weeks. Things would happen. TVs would come on, knocking on the walls, banging, thuds, doors slamming shut, screaming, lights coming on in the laundry room with no one there. So, I mean, stuff like that happens. The most recent things happened once in September and twice now in October. I was laying in bed, and we got Scrappy, our new Chihuahua dachshund, what they call him, dachshund mix.
Yeah.
He looks like Scrappy Doo. That's why we call him Scrappy. And we got Sparky, and Sparky is another Pomeranian, black and white Pomeranian. And of course, we still have Woody. And Scrappy sleeps in bed with us. Woody sleeps on the floor next to my wife's side of the bed, and Sparky sleeps under the bed. And about 3:30, well, going back to September, let me jump back to this. We're both laying in bed, and I just all of a sudden woke up for whatever reason. As I did, I saw this bright flash of light in the hallway, as if like all the lights in the hallway came on real fast and shut off. I thought, that's really weird.
Yeah.
So I got up and knocked on Josh's door, woke him up. It wasn't him. He wasn't up. I asked Kathy if she had seen it. She was sleeping, so she didn't know anything. The dogs didn't pay any attention to it, so I thought that's kind of strange. It was just a bright flash of light, and then it was gone. So I thought, okay, well, maybe this stuff's starting to act up again. Moved forward to October. We're starting to hear the knocking again. We were laying in bed probably about a week ago, and literally we hear what sounds like someone at the door. We hear, and Scrappy, it woke him up because he started barking, and he's like growling and barking, and of course it woke Woody up, and Woody's barking, and then Sparky starts barking, and all 3 dogs. And I literally thought, God, there's somebody at our door at 3 o'clock in the morning, because it sounded like, somebody knocking at the door. So I get up and I walk down the hallway to the top of the stairs. I look down and I could see out the top windows of our door. There's nobody there. So we have security cameras on the front and back doors of our house. I go to check the security camera footage. There's nothing. Nothing tripped the camera. Nothing set the camera off. But I know for a fact I heard the knocking. And I didn't say anything to Kathy about it. And I came back to bed and laid back down. And she goes, "Did you hear the knocking?" And I said, I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, I heard the knocking. And she said, yeah, it woke me up, and then it woke Scrappy up. He started barking, and then Woody started barking, and Sparky started barking, and now everybody's up. So I laid there for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and it was quiet after that. Nothing happened. I sent Josh a message on Facebook just saying, hey, I know you're in the basement. Did you hear anybody knocking? Did you hear knocking at the door? He said, nope, I didn't hear a thing. So I went back to sleep, didn't think anything of it. A couple of days later, he said, you know that knocking you asked me about? And I said, yeah. And he said, the other night I was laying down here on the couch watching TV because I couldn't sleep, and I heard knocking coming from the garage. So it's the activity starting up again. But yeah, it's been going on now since we moved in June of 2017, and it comes in waves. It was real active for the first, from June until November of 2017. Then it kind of died down for November, December, the end of November, December, January, and then it started acting up again in the spring. Then it dies down for a couple of months, then it acts up again. And now it seems like it comes in waves of 3 or 4, maybe 5 things happen, and then it quiets down again. So yeah, that's what's been going on in my house for the last couple of years.
Bizarre, dude. No, I mean, it could be the little. I don't know about the little girl thing, but idea that it's a relative that's passed on that is protecting you from a malevolent force, that could explain that, maybe the footsteps that you're hearing, maybe that's the protective spirit, and then the malevolent one is the one that's doing the knocking and the destruction.
It's possible. I've had two people do a remote view on the house, remote viewing, and they both told me that there's something very dark here. They can't see what it is, but it's a very dark presence. And I've had, 4 or 5 psychic mediums, something like that, in the house with the paranormal groups, and they've all told me that pretty much the same thing. One was pretty much right on when she described the spirit that's protecting the family spirit. She described my wife's father, who passed away back in 2016, almost to a T. Bald, mustache, glasses, skinny. I mean, it was almost a perfect description of him, and she never knew him or never met him. So that kind of made sense. He just passed away, and he was kind of watching out for us here at the house. Although I can't confirm that.
Right.
I honestly don't know, but that's what she told us. As far as the malevolent spirit here, I've tried to do some historical research on the house to see if anybody died in the house. The house was built in 1973. It's only had one owner. I actually said 2 owners, the husband and wife. They lived here from that time until they sold it to us in 2016. No one's ever died in the house. They had their mother live with them for a while, but she passed away in a nursing home. I reached out to them and asked them if they ever had anything weird happen in the house. They said no. One of the psychics that was here said that someone on the street in the neighborhood committed suicide, and they felt that their spirit was moving between houses. And we have a live stream water, a freshwater spring, if you want to call it that runs through our backyard. And that every year, depending on the rain, if we get a lot of rain, it floods our hill coming down into our back patio. But one of the psychics said that's probably the source of energy where the spirits are getting their energy from. Although, again, I can't confirm anything. I don't know much about what causes a haunted house, other than I can say we have a lot of paranormal. I call it paranormal activity because I can't explain it, and I've tried figuring it out rationally to what's causing the noises. Animals in the house. I know it's not our animals, our cats or dogs. I know we don't have rodents in the walls. I've checked the foundation of the house. I've checked the attic. Any place I could see. I'm not seeing any signs of animals. I'm not seeing any animal droppings, any nests. No squirrel droppings or anything like that. Signs of squirrels getting their way in the house or the attic or the basement. So I really have no idea what could be causing the knocking or any of the other activity.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you also had a house blessing performed. More than one, right?
We've had 2 of them done,
yeah.
Yes. We had one done by a pastor he's an ordained pastor, and he runs a paranormal group. He came and he did a blessing for us. And we had a psychic medium who's a metaphysical reverend or minister, whatever you want to call her. She did several blessings on the house. She did a blessing on the land. She did a blessing on the house itself and a blessing on us. And that seemed to calm things down for a good couple of months, but then all of a sudden it started acting up again, like it does.
So weird.
Yeah, it's strange. And I'll be honest with you, you and I have talked to hundreds of people, literally, that have had paranormal experiences and encounters, and whether they're demonic or they're passive hauntings. And until you actually experience it for yourself, you always have that seed of doubt in the back of your mind, like, are they really experiencing this? I mean, it sounds almost too good to be true. It's really hard to believe. But then once this stuff really starts happening to you, it really opens your eyes to the possibilities of what the other people are describing is really happening to them.
Yes. And actually, I can relate to that with tonight's guest and topic. So tonight's guest is, and we're going to have him on in just a few minutes, is Darren Evans. And you may have seen him on an episode of Ghost Adventures. He's written a book co-authored by Rosemary Ellen Guiley called The Zozo Phenomenon. And the episode he was on with Ghost Adventures, they were he retelling his experience, his initial experience with Zozo, and how that played out, and then in the episode they try to contact Zozo again, just to see if they can, if he can make contact. And I just lost my train of thought. I know, right?
I freaked you out with all the ghost stuff going on in my house.
Well, my head is just swimming. I started reading his book like 2 days ago. And ever since I started reading the book, weird stuff has been going on straight away, right off the bat, weird stuff. But the weirdest of all, okay, last night I got home from work and, I gave up smoking cigarettes a little over 2 years ago, but I vape nicotine, right? And so we have these things called puff bars. They're kind of like a Juul, but it's not a Juul. But it's like an electronic cigarette that is disposable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I got home from work and I had a new one that I opened up and started puffing on. And, it has a little blue light at the bottom that lets you know that it's working. So I took a couple puffs on it and I set it on the table. And I noticed the blue light was still lit. And I told my husband, I said, wait a second, that it's still burning. Like, it's still going. And he was like, what is going on with this thing? So he puffed on it and he got a bunch of vape out of it. And the light was steady. Like someone, it was just a constant inhale happening, right? So it was malfunctioning in some way. And so he's holding it and he said, yeah, it's starting to get hot in my hand. And so I said, well, let's just go ahead and put it out on the front porch in case it ignites, like blows up or something. I don't want it to blow up in your hand. Let's just put it outside for now. So it was a brand new e-cigarette that immediately malfunctioned. Now, that in and of itself, no big deal. Nothing to really even think twice about. It was just a weird thing, right? So this morning I get up early so I can finish reading the book before the interview. And there's a particular chapter where he's, and I'm sure he'll touch on this, he's talking about an occurrence where he was dealing with a Yorkshire Terrier mix dog. And Kato he's a Chiweenie Yorkshire Terrier. That's my dog, Kato. And I remember as I was reading that, I thought of Kato, right? Because I'm like, they didn't specify what kind. In the Zozo Phenomenon, he said it was a Yorkshire Terrier mix. And so that's what my dog is. He's a Chiweenie Yorkshire Terrier. So I thought about my own dog, Kato. So I'd say about 30 minutes later, we let both the dogs in the backyard. And when we let them out to do their business, we just let, it's a fully fenced yard. We don't have to, keep our eyes on them. They can just go do what they want. And we just stay inside, watch TV, and then they'll come in and bark at the door when they're ready to come in. So about 30 minutes after I'd read that part of the book, we let the dogs outside, and they're out there for about 20 minutes or so, and we hear a little bark. They're ready to come in. And we let the dogs in, and they come running around the couch, and we smell this terrible smell. And I'm like, both of us are like, what did you get into? And it was Kato, the Yorkshire Terrier mix.
Mm-hmm.
He reeked of like decomposition all over his fur, like, but there was nothing visible. Like, he didn't appear wet. There was no substance. He didn't feel grimy. He just had this horrible smell. I was just like, bro, like, we need to give you a bath. You smell like it's awful. Then, while I'm reading the book, I'm still reading feverishly, trying to get through the book before the interview. In the meantime, my husband's next to me on the couch, and he's playing Xbox. And the Xbox, the game just shut down, and on the screen it says, controller disconnected. And he was like, what the fuck? And I looked up at the screen, and I saw that the game had stopped, and it said controller disconnected. So he backed out and he restarted the game, and I started reading again. And about an hour later, what the fuck happened again? The game just crashed and it stopped mid-game, kicked him out of the game, and popped up on the screen, controller disconnected. It's just, and as we get into this interview, there was a lot in Darren's book that really rang some bells with me. So I think we've built up enough suspense, and we can go ahead and welcome Darren Evans to the show, to our Halloween special. Darren, thank you so much for coming on to Macabre Moments and being our Halloween special.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm here, and ought to make for a pretty cool little Halloween show.
Well, I got to be honest with you. A few months ago, I guess it was around April is when graduation was, May, June. I mean, I don't know, do months even matter this year? But it was during the time of graduation, right? And I saw a lot of cars driving by, decorated for graduation, because we all had to celebrate in a different fashion this year, right? And
sure.
I happened to look over at a car, and they had put 2020 in soap on the windows on the car, but I read Zozo. And I was like, wait a second. Could Zozo and 2020 be
connected?
Yeah, and that wasn't meant to be my first question, so don't answer me now. We'll get back to that. But that's when I was like, okay, I have to get Darren Evans on the show, because we need to get to the bottom of the Zozo phenomenon. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us your story.
My story.
How it started.
Oh, okay. Well, my introduction to Phenomenon was in the early 80s. I believe it was 1982. I was 15 years old, teenager, and there was a strange double-sided Ouija board found underneath my girlfriend's house in West Tulsa. And my grandmother lived across the street from her, so I spent a lot of time there in my youth, right on the banks of the Arkansas River. We were always swimming and camping and just doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, anyway, a plumber had found a muddy Ouija board. It was sitting in some dry mud, and it took a while to dig it out. And it was surrounded by these weird jars that had a white chalky substance around the jars. And so I pulled one of them jars out and wiped it off with a towel and held it up to the sun, and it had a preserved blackbird inside the jar. And the jar had these old mechanical lightning tops, they're called, and it was really old. And so I immediately thought that was strange, and that was not the first time I'd ever found a weird preserved mason jar that had a blackbird in it. The other one was found in the city of Sand Springs during a remodel we were doing. My cousin had a backhoe, and we were digging out some kind of a water line. And I found this like 8 foot deep in the ground, and it was another preserved blackbird. So that immediately I was like, wow, what is this? Anyway, the board was found. The jars were surrounding the board in each corner. And so I knew enough back then. I didn't know a lot about, witchcraft or anything like that, but I knew enough that we kind of all just thought, wow, this was probably involved in some kind of ritual or whatever. And it was the first Ouija board that I'd ever been exposed to. And I remember the strange thing was it was double-sided. On one side, it had an old William Fold board, and then the other side had a homemade board, and it said Zozo on it. And it had wings. It had all kinds of strange symbols, and it was just a piece of art. It just looked creepy. And there for a while, I thought every Ouija board there was double-sided. Again, because that was my first exposure to it. So, yeah, my introduction was getting on that board, and a spirit came through and pretended to be one of my grandmas that had passed away. And it had a weird thing where we would purposely use the William Fold side because it was less creepy. But when we would do that, the planchette would scoot off the board and onto the table or wherever we were at, and then it would scoot the whole board off the table, and it would land on what we called the dark side, which was the Zozo side. And it was some time before Zozo actually came, because it was always pretending to be someone nice, and that's how my experiences started, and it led to me becoming obsessed with getting on the board and talking to whatever would come. So this went on for years, and it caused me to kind of alienate my family and all that kind of stuff. And it just, over the years, I had more experiences. I had a nervous breakdown because of all the influences that, this thing was telling me what to do. It was telling me what to say. And it just got uncontrollable. And then, this same entity would come through, and it identified its name as, Zio, and it would do the rainbow effect that I eventually called that, going back and forth from Zio, but very purposely. And it seemed like when it would announce itself, it would do the strange figure eight patterns and the circles and the tight spirals, and just, you could really tell that when this thing dropped in, there was a dramatic increase in planchette activity and intensity, and then you felt a strange dark presence. And so that's how it all started back in the 80s, and later on in the late 90s or the mid 90s, when the internet came out, I began digging around trying to find out if anybody else had strange experiences like me on the board. And sure enough, I was able to find a couple of strange encounters where other people were also experiencing the same entity. And so I started to, research it more. I started collecting the stories of people that have had experiences, and I created a blog about it. And from there, it got caught, as a producer or an independent film company gave me a call and wanted to make a movie about it. And I was like, sure, why not? It's always been my purpose. And my original post on trueghosttales.com became kind of a viral thing where hundreds of people were commenting upon, what I'd written, and other people came forward and said that they'd experienced it too. So I knew that I didn't make any of this up, and I've been accused of that. There's a lot of people that think it's all fabricated, but they just really don't look deep enough into the phenomenon to discover what I've already discovered. Many instances, many old vintage apocrypha, grimoires, periodicals, news, magazine letters. There's been all kinds of references to a demonic Zozo throughout history. And so there's no way I could have made any of this stuff up. It really happened, and people really do have experiences. But I'll tell you, it's evolved into something I would have never dreamed of, with all the hype and the who knows how many fake videos are out there with people trying to gain publicity on YouTube and whatnot, because the whole Zozo thing just kind of went out of control.
Yeah, I could see that. So the original board, the one that was found under the dual-sided board that had the Zozo side, right? Didn't it
Right?
have the name Zozo inscribed on the dark side?
Yes, it did.
And what happened to that board?
There's been some controversy about what I've said about this board. People claim that I've said, well, on the front side there was Zozo, and on the flip side or the back side there was William Folk. I've never determined which side was which. On one side, and that's how I always told the story. On one side there was one board, and on the other side it was what we call the dark side, which was the Zozo side. And so I don't know why all the controversy is about, well, one day he says it's on one side, and none of that makes any sense to me because it's simply a two-sided board.
Yeah.
And I've never said with front or back and then, people look for just anything they can to try to disprove you, but we really found this board. It really did happen, and a lot of weird things happened on that board. And we had moved, or my girlfriend had moved from Tulsa to Jennings, way out in the country. And they had told me to get rid of the board. And so I took off walking with the board way out in the woods, and I found an abandoned campsite.
Can I
and
stop
I found
you
an
really
old
quick?
Austin Healey. Yeah.
Before you went to hide that board, you had you performed an experiment regarding a dog.
Sure.
Would you mind telling that part?
Well, I was the guy that if you didn't believe in Ouija boards or spirits, then I was the guy that could come over to your house and make you a believer. And I did that on numerous occasions. And we were sitting around amongst a group of people one afternoon in Jennings. And this is what caused me, this whole incident is what caused my girlfriend's mom to demand that I get rid of the board. And I just couldn't shake loose of it. So anyway, what happened with the dog is her mom had this little Chihuahua-looking dog. And we were messing with the board. It wasn't doing much. And I kind of just got crazy. And I said, well, can you command the dog, to come here? I knew the dog was in the other room, but I didn't know that the door was shut. And so when it went right to yes. And so when I said, okay, command the dog to come here. And well, the dog started scratching, wanting to go from the living room into the other room where we were, but it couldn't because the dog, the door was closed. And so the dog starts kind of going crazy, wanting out of that room. So her mom was also in that room, and she's like, well, okay, I'll let you out. She let the dog out. And I'll never forget this. This dog came running towards us and stopped right in front of the board. We were on the floor, and the dog stopped right next to the Ouija board and started looking at it, and it was trembling, like it was just scared out of its wits, And that kind of freaked everybody out, and I was like, wow, okay, well, make the dog go back to the other room. Well, again, what I didn't know is that Tina had shut the door after she let the dog out. Well, the dog goes back immediately and tries to get back in that room like I told it to, and it's trying to claw its way back in. So she lets the dog back in. This time she leaves the door open. I said, command the dog to come back. And so here it comes running back, and it sits right there in front of the board again. It's trembling, and it was just, we were able to, to instruct the dog what to do through some kind of teleportation or some kind of weird, method. But then the dog started barking and growling and biting itself and trying to bite me. And it's, I had to kick it outside, and it was like the dog become possessed, and it freaked everybody out. And I was told at that point I was living with them, and I was told either to get rid of the board or move out. So that's what, and that dog was found with his throat cut out the woods. Crazy, but it happened,
So they said now you got to get rid of the board or you have to move out, and so now you're walking out into the woods with the board.
Yeah, I found an abandoned campsite, and I found an old Austin Healey that had been abandoned. It had the trunk latch, and it had the hood and the trunk latch were both open, slightly, and so I figured this would be probably a good place to stash this board, and I stashed it in the trunk of this abandoned car. And when I came back about 2 weeks later, I came back to them. I never found the location because it was a long hike from where they lived out in the woods. And this abandoned campsite, obviously somebody was on the run or wanted or something because it had an old bus out there. The bus was, I found shotguns inside the bus. I found an album collection, just all kinds of beer everywhere. It had been, like it was a beer drinking good old boy lived out there in the woods or something and had a bunch of stuff, and it just, for whatever reason, he left it abandoned. And so I came back about 2 weeks later, and I don't really know why. I had a strange obsession with that whole board because of, the things that would happen with it. And I came back, and I'll never forget, when I opened that trunk lid, there was about 50 rats that jumped out at me. And the board was gone. The board had been devoured by all these rats. I fell backwards, and I had like 2 or 3 rats on me, great big ones, lots of baby ones. And it was like something out of a horror movie. They just all came jumping out. I guess I startled them, and they had ate the board. And you could see parts of the board down in there amongst all the other stuff that they used to make their nest. I mean, they chewed the back seat of it up. I mean, everything was just chewed up by these rats, including the board. And so that tripped me out. And
now at that point, were you devastated? Were you just like, God, I'm never going to be able to talk to this entity again? Like
No, because I was smart enough to realize I didn't really like talking to that thing because, I mean, it had just always wanted you to do something bad, always had bad things. It always had really sexual, negative things to say for females that were present. and they would get angry. I mean, it knew when they were on their menstruation cycle. It would say things and embarrass them. It knew which boys they liked. It just knew things that it shouldn't know. And so I didn't really like this Zozo character, and I would always try to get something else. And other entities came through, Zaza, Mama. Mm-hmm. And so I had an early experience with all these alter egos or whatever they are, you know, and then later on in research, I find that a lot of other, you know, stories involving Mama and Zaza were also present during these weird Zozo seances during Ouija board sessions. And so, and why they choose these strange names is probably to confuse us or for whatever reason, but they do. And it caused me to, you know, look into this strange letter Z and its fascinating history and just lots of connections going on. And so over time, I just became a guy that was trying to make sense of all this. And in doing so, I found a lot of old references to demonic Zozo throughout history.
So did you give up playing with the Ouija board at that point?
Well, when I had a nervous breakdown and it was almost like I was almost to a full possession type thing. I was not myself. And I remember leaving a city and left all my personal belongings there, all my vehicles, my guitars, everything. I just left it there. I was scared to go back because of all the weird things that were happening around me. And I showed up at my mom's doorstep, a scared and troubled young man, you know. Mm-hmm. And my mom was going to Bible college at the time. She believed in the laying of hands and exorcisms and all that. And so she kind of gave me an impromptu exorcism, and I slept for like 48 hours. And my mom said she saw demonic entities that were swirling around me while I was sleeping. And when I woke up, I felt a lot better, and I promised her I wouldn't mess the boards no more and la, la, la. But, you know, like they say, curiosity killed the cat.
Oh, yeah.
And I found myself in situations where I really was obsessed with it. And to this day, I'm always got this strange urge to get back on the board. You know, when I do, this thing usually comes through, unfortunately.
So you did then, at some point, give in and play the board again?
Yeah. I mean, multiple occasions I would just test the waters, and I'd be amongst a new group of people or have a new girlfriend. And when I went to Michigan, I was dating this girl. She was a skeptic. She didn't believe in it. And she kept pestering me to show her, you know, because I told her some stories. And so I'd actually printed out a board up in Battle Creek, Michigan. And some strange things happened. You know, kind of turned her into a believer pretty quick. And so, it's just one of them things where when I get on a board, I don't know if it's expectation bias or recognition bias or what causes it to happen, but it often surfaces and then I got to deal with, whatever it says, Yeah. And so, it's not something that I, I'm proud of. And, I've been accused of creating a monster and blah, blah, blah. That was never my intent. My intent was just basically to warn people that, these spirit boards can be dangerous. And I still feel that way.
Yeah, no. And I feel that comes, that comes through very clear in your book. That's what you're doing, is you're trying to warn people and let people know. I mean, just the research alone proves that Zozo was something that existed before you found that board.
Before I was even born. Oh, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
And it exists under the radar, and it's like, people are going to believe, people are going to be skeptics until they actually have their own experience. And, that's just what happens, and it makes sense. I mean, most of your paranormal enthusiasts that want to have an experience, what do? Often they'll go seek out a Ouija board, and it'll be Halloween time or just, nowadays it's just any day of the year. These people, I mean, there's so many of them out there that people get on these boards, and, not all experiences are bad, but it's a roll of the dice. And I've always said that you never know what's going to come through. And what I try to tell people is it really doesn't make much difference if these spirits exist outside of ourselves or if we're actually talking to archetypes or different personalities within our own subconscious. It really makes no difference because they can be just as dangerous. I mean, here's the thing. scientifically about Ouija boards, is it can produce a self-fulfilling prophecy, which they have proven actually is a phenomenon, and that's why I warn people not to ask, questions pertaining to death or future events or tragic events, because they can plant a seed, in your subconscious. And there's been, plenty of evidence to suggest that when something tells you that something bad is going to happen on April 16th, and you in the back of your mind, you may not think about it a lot, but you're thinking about it. Maybe in your sleep, or maybe just, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And some of the things that it reveals to teenagers and adolescents, I really don't think that they're ready for those types of remarks. I mean, when something comes through and, let's say if the parents don't care if their little 9-year-olds get on the board, something comes through and says it's going to drag them to hell and it's going to do bad things to them. I just don't think it's appropriate for kids to get on boards. And I know a lot of people feel differently about that, but I'm just through my experiences and my research, I've found that they can be dangerous, especially to young people.
Right. Well, because I'm my experience that I had was when I was a late teenager, and we were looking to get scared. That's what we wanted, right? So, and I think that's the mentality of most of the younger people that that's what the attraction is to the Ouija board is, no, I don't want to, at that point, I think a good majority of them haven't experienced a lot of loss with their family or friends. So it's not like they're trying to reach out to somebody that they know. They're looking more for the spook factor. And this is another reason why I wanted to have you on for a Halloween special, because I feel like, especially this year with, social distancing and trick-or-treating and Halloween parties, are going to be a lot different, or not at all. I am worried that a lot of people are going to turn to the Ouija board this Halloween for their entertainment, or for the their spook factor, right? What they're going to do for the night. And this Halloween is a special Halloween. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Oh, yeah, full moon and all that.
It's a blue moon. It's the night that we lose the hour.
Yeah, it's 2020. The veil's going to be thinner than it's ever been, possibly.
Right. And then it's also some other special kind of moon that only happens like every 76 years. The next time it's going to happen, or the last time it happened was in 46 or 42 or something like that. I can't remember the exact date, but so it's ironic to me, or I should say synchronistic, depending on your viewpoint, right? That this Halloween is happening in the year 2020, and 2020 could easily be translated to Zozo, right? Those twos could be Z's.
Absolutely. And I have been talking about this for years. Me and Rosemary Ellen Guiley wrote the Zozo Phenomenon, and may she rest in peace. She's unfortunately passed, and we all miss her. She was basically the queen of the paranormal, especially when it comes to authoring paranormal books and dictionaries.
Absolutely.
She was, nobody knew more than Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Her research into the jinn. She was just very affluent in her knowledge and the way she expressed herself, her vocabulary, her intelligence, off
her
the
compassion.
chart. And so, you said something about synchronicity, and right before you called, I was actually reading about synchronicity. It's one of the things that continues to baffle me. But you had said something about seeing 2020 or Zozo on the cars, for the Halloween or for the whatever.
The graduations,
and, yeah, and this has happened, earlier this year, whenever Biden announced his candidacy. He had a big pizza party. Well, there was somebody had drew 2020 on the pizza. Well, it looked just like Zozo, and it said Biden. And then when Donald Trump had tweeted something a couple of weeks ago, there was an aerial photograph. Somebody had painted a great big Trump 2020, and it looked just like Zozo, and it was an aerial photograph. This thing was huge, and that's happened all over the place, that these twos often look like Z's, and people have got to be careful when they don't really realize that, they could be, I'm not saying it's happening. My research, I put it out there for people to, here's the research, here's some strange connections. You decide whether or not it's actually connected, or, because I don't make bold claims. I just put the research out there, and I tell people you can make your own mind up, But the fact remains is in 2016, I tweeted that I had received emails from people saying that they had strange messages from Zozo saying that they were going to be put into a coma in 2020, that Armageddon was coming in 2020. And I have all screenshots of this on my website at darrenevansparanormal.blogspot.com. And you can see the screenshots. You can see I screenshotted some of the emails between me and Rosemary because I was pretty concerned about all these emails that were coming in saying that 2020 was the real Armageddon date, not 2012. And then I looked up some things on Stephen Hawking, and before he had passed, he had put out an article saying that the Mayans were incorrect in their historical mathematics, that the real end of the Earth was going to be 2020. So all these things, and for people to be contacting me and Rose and saying, look, this thing's telling us some major event's going to happen in 2020 according to this Zozo character. And so I have an article about that, about all the weirdness surrounding 2020 and this Zozo entity. I mean, are they connected? I don't know, but there are some strange synchronicities that are going on and have been going on, and so when I wrote the article, it was like earlier this year when everybody was kind of panicking because of the pandemic, and the strange synchronicities between the coronavirus being the sixth virus, whatever. I can't remember what all, I researched about the coronavirus, but there's connections there. But the fact that, when I tweeted in 2016 that there was going to be a full moon in January of 2020, and to look for, some kind of weird occurrence, and that happened to be when my mom passed, January 11th of 2020, the first full moon of this year. So the year started out and that was, right before the big pandemic happened. Yeah. And so, everything began to, just explode, the fires and now we've got this Zeta hurricane that's building now. It's like the 27th storm of the year, setting records and hurricanes. This will be the fifth hurricane that reached landfall, if it indeed increases to a category, whatever. But, of all things to happen, here towards the end of the year, we've got a hurricane that's developing that they named, Zeta, which is the Greek word for Z.
And that's because they're through the entire alphabet, and this is the first year we're going to be going into the Greek alphabet in centuries, or I think ever. Yeah.
So all this weird shit's happened in 2020, and it's like been the most, mind-boggling, weirdest year ever. And, and again, people were sending me emails saying that this Zozo entity. And there was another story where this guy was doing a board before Donald Trump even announced his candidacy 4 years ago. This guy had a Ouija session, and Zozo came through and said that, that Donald Trump would be the next president and that we were going to go to war, and so with China. And so there was all these weird synchronicities with that experience. And that was before Donald Trump even announced his candidacy. For the Ouija board, for this guy to write in saying that Donald Trump's, it was predicted that he's going to be the president and there's going to be this huge conflict in 2020, that raised a red flag with me. I documented that, and it's just like, I document these things and I keep in my archives because there's too much connections to all this. I mean, throughout history, the word Zozo is always associated with a demonic entity, an evil force. In the Malaysian language, Zozo means a walking spirit. You've got the Zozo people of Burma who have very strange beliefs, vis animism. They believe that objects and places and people that can be possessed by spirits. You have the Zozo shaman in Africa, which basically it's been proven recently that they started the whole Ebola plague because of their scarification rituals, their drinking of blood, drinking of fluids, some bizarre stuff. And so, there's just thing after thing after thing that connects this with evil long before I was even born. you've got the Dictionary Infernal that came out in various editions in the 1800s, which describe a young girl that was possessed by 3 demons: Caprole, Mimi, and Zozo. And so when you start to see evidences of this name being involved in possessions, being involved, there's another ancient Mayan prophecy which lists Zozo as the ruler of all demons, and that it's actually going to be a human that's released from the 9th circle of copper by King Yarling. And this is crazy stuff. I don't make this stuff. I was contacted by a foreign exchange student in Tibet who had a very strange story of an old man ghost that called itself Zozo that was pushing students off the cliffs. If it wasn't for that, I would not have stumbled across this, this ancient Tibetan reference in demonology, this prophecy, which reads like it's just being ripped out of today's headlines. It says that when Zozo is released from its captivity, that it'll gang up with all the demons of Earth, and it'll sign in the next stage, or epoch they call it, which is the beginning of the end of mankind. Is when Zozo is released. And if you look at the story, if you look at how the Zozo phenomenon basically happened so quickly, once people started hearing about it, then people come out of the woodwork. Yeah, man, in the 90s, in the 80s, I had a Zozo experience. I thought it was Oz. It would go from O to Z, O to Z. There's all these people that have come forward, and they can't be liars, all of them, and so there's definitely more going on than people give credit for with this weird phenomenon.
There's so much that I want to say right now, but what I'm going to ask you is, at some point you created a website where people could come and report their experiences with Zozo on the Ouija board. And then I'm assuming it was after that is when you were asked to be a part of a movie that was made.
Yeah.
And so I was how did that play out?
Well, they asked me if I wanted to be a part of it, and I said, well, if it's done a certain way, I don't mind. And, we agreed that
they were making a movie about Zozo, right? Like contacting Zozo on the Ouija board. Or were they wanting to, was it like a broad stroke, story, or were they trying to cover?
Well, the film is loosely based on a Zozo case. Okay. And so that's what they based the film off of, was that particular Zozo case. And they asked me to be a part of it, and I have a brief, part, role in the film, where I save, I go meet this individual that's Tess in the film that becomes possessed and is in basically an insane asylum, and I come and get the board, and she asked me what it is, and I try to explain to her anyway. It was a creepy experience. The whole filming process is where it was filmed at this huge, the largest temple in North America. Yeah, Masonic temple in North America, and it's just a crazy place, and it was just filled with ravens everywhere, murders of ravens everywhere on this property. And I had a weird experience during the filming of I Am Zozo, inside this place. It looked like The Shining on the inside. It was endless hallways. Just a really super creepy haunted location, and they wanted to film my parts in a actual haunted location. And so I remember having this weird experience, and I needed to go smoke a cigarette and get my shit together. And I walked outside, and I'm sitting there smoking a cigarette, on the grounds of this huge Masonic temple, and I hear what sounds like the penguin on the old Batman series. It's going wah 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 wah. And I'm like, what the hell is that? Something is laughing at me. And I look up and I see this huge raven in this tree, and it's laughing at me. And so I break out on my little cell phone. At the time was a BlackBerry. You remember the old BlackBerry cell phones?
Oh, yeah.
They don't take. I whip out my BlackBerry, and I start filming this, just totally spontaneous. Start filming this freaking raven that's laughing at me. And in the film, you can plainly see the raven jumping off its perch and dive-bombing straight down, and then it totally vanishes into thin air. And so I remember looking through my, camera on the lens on the, on the cell phone, because it had a little hole you could look through. And I remember saying, where the hell did it go? And I backed off, and I'm looking around, I'm not looking through the viewfinder now. Now I'm looking like, where the hell did this bird just go? And it totally disappeared, man. And that is on YouTube. That was actually on my first paranormal show that I was featured on, Fact or Fakes. And it was one of the only incidences where they didn't say whether they thought whether it was faked or not. I had to send the SD card to a digital forensic pathologist that they had hired, and they determined that film footage was unedited. And so it's not something that I made up. I mean, this damn thing, and so here we go back again to the weird association with the Zozo Phenomenon and ravens and blackbirds.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to find out that in the ancient Basque language, Zozo actually means blackbird or crow. And that's one of the oldest languages, known to man that they've been able to, decipher. And so there's all these connections to these ravens and ravenology and the whole bad omens of ravens. And, they've kind of got they're beautiful animals, but they've got a pretty sordid past when it comes to, the symbolism of ravens and stuff. And so it's just another one of the weird connections with these corvids, these intelligent animals, these blackbirds and crows and ravens.
Yeah, so in preparation for this interview, I watched the movie last night, and just from the very first scene actually brought back a repressed memory for me, which kind of blew my mind. But after that, there's a scenic shot of like an ocean, and I knew instantly that was filmed here in the Pacific Northwest. I just didn't know where. And for listeners that don't know, I live in Seattle, Washington.
There's an island outside of Seattle.
Yeah, it's the San Juan Islands.
Yeah.
So it was filmed in the San Juan Islands. The Masonic temple that you were at is in Des Moines, Washington, which isn't far from me. Yeah. So getting into these synchronicities.
That place out before they tear it down.
Oh, I'm gonna, dog. I'm going to. I was like, screenshot. I was taking screenshots of your book, right? Like, oh, I gotta check this out. I gotta check this out. I gotta check this out. So you did over the years. You contacted Zozo on the Ouija board. I'd say a lot, right? But there was respites in between. So you would use the board, and then you would, it'd be a couple years, maybe even 10, and then you would come in across someone that wasn't a believer, and you're telling your story, and you're like, well, I mean, I can prove it to you, right? Like, I'll just prove it to you, and you'd get back on that board, and you'd prove it to them, but pretty much always with a price.
Exactly. And it was, it's just been time after time. That's why I'm very reluctant to get on the board. I've done some sessions with shamans and trying, the whole protection thing. And, the last time I got on the board, was cosmic indication where I was using boards to possibly summon a UFO. And that was my intent. And Zozo did not come through, but a strange entity came through called T1 or T13 or whatever it was, which we researched and found out that was a Cinderella star was capable of supporting life. And I had a bunch of witnesses, a bunch of strange. I had a couple of paranormal devices going at the same time, and they said this guy's middle name, who was the first time he was ever on the board, his middle name, nobody knew what his middle name was, and it came up. It actually came out of the spirit box. And so, it's something that I still have an interest in, especially if I can keep the demons away. But again, it's just like, why am I fucking with this? Excuse my language.
Language is okay. We can swear.
Yeah. But yeah, and I really wanted to try to prove to myself that I can do a session and have something good come through, because I am friends with Karen Dahlman. She's a proponent of the board. I have a lot of friends that are, in the paranormal circles that they kind of put up with me, but they really don't like me because, they've got their opinions and I've got mine. And I remember being asked to speak at the OuijaCon, the big paranormal conference with Robert Birch and John Zappas and Chip Coffey, Rosemary, a bunch of paranormal celebrities being there. And it was me and Karen's first experience, in that whole paranormal, convention circuit or whatever. And But I remember they saved my, lecture for last, and everybody's using boards, and it was just kind of freaky. They had the museum, they had the traveling museum, they had this great big room where you could go through and see hundreds of vintage boards, and I was able to capture an EVP walking around that room all by myself, and it was just like when I got up there and speak, here I've got Zaphis and Rosemary out in the crowd, and the guy from the Holzer File, Dave Schrader's there. I mean, just everybody's there. And I remember, I was pretty nervous. I'm like, I'm just going to tell the truth. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. The first thing I said was, "Hey guys, I'm Darren Evans. I'm writing a book with Rosemary Ellen Guiley about the Zozo Phenomenon." I had a whole, lecture planned, and I said, "I know you guys have been sitting here listening to all these other lectures, and I respect their opinions." I said, "But let me tell you something, folks. When it comes to Ouija boards, it's not all peaches and cream. You've got a dark side to this." And I began doing my, putting my, telling my story. And, it was just pretty strange because I'm just an average guy. I don't have a college education. I've never had an agenda. I've never done this to try to make money. I know I've been accused of that, but you don't make a lot of money in the paranormal world unless you're Zach Bagans or somebody,
Right.
And, and so after we did the film, it was about a year went by, 2 years went by, and I was contacted by Ghost Adventures, wanting to know if we could go back into the house, one of the houses that I lived in that I experienced a lot of paranormal phenomenon. And so I was like, sure, let's do it. I'll get back on the board one more time, and they definitely wanted me to get back on the board, and I did with Nick Groff. And the weird thing about that whole episode is that's Nick Groff's last episode.
Yeah, that blew my mind when I read that. Go ahead.
Oh, it was just, him and Zach were, you could feel the tension between them. At one point, they were screaming at each other on the set, and nothing was pre-choreographed. And, like the Ghost Adventures gets kind of a bad rep sometimes because they've been accused of scripting things. And, I've been on the show 3 or 4 times, and nothing was ever scripted. I mean, it was all spontaneous, and, I was treated with respect, and other people have had different, experiences with Zach and the gang, but I've always had a pleasant one with them as far as getting along with the guys. And when we filmed at the Samaritan Cult House, as Zach approached me, he said, "Well, what if we got on the board and you tried to contact this crazy old cult leader and stuff?" And I said, "Look, Zach, I don't mind getting on the board again." I said, "But, if something comes through, I'm not responsible. I don't know what's going to come through." And when it started talking about Jay's brother being sick and talking about his liver or kidneys or whatever, I had no idea Jay even had a brother.
Right.
And they stopped, and Zach was pissed. He pulled me off to the side, and he said, "Darren," he said, "what the fuck is going on here? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm not doing nothing but what you asked me to do, Zach." I said, "I'm not trying to, pull any fast ones." I said, "It's, it spells out what it spells out, man. And I told you going into this that I'm not responsible. I'm only, I'm just channeling what comes through." And he sat down and talked to Jay, and they talked, they kind of, whispered back and forth between one another and the gang, and they were like, they made the determination. There was no way I could have even known. Jay's a pretty private guy when it comes to his family. And I had no knowledge of his brother. I did not know he had a brother, did not know his brother was sick. And so it really fucked with Jay. I could tell at the time that something was bothering him when he said, "That's it, I'm done," and then I didn't even realize what was going on until Zach and him talked, and then they come to me and they're like, "Darren," and so, it's, again, and the last time I did the board was on the Halloween special in 2018 at Zach's Haunted, Museum. And I may have been one of the only people that's ever used a board inside there. I don't know, but I mean, we used a board. We had Joshua
P. Warren, are you kidding me?
Yeah, Joshua Warren was there with his Tesla machine and his Jacob's ladder, and it's all firing off. And there's an electricity in that seance room that was off the charts that I've never experienced before. I mean, this was just the buildup. Even though me and Jay were on the board during that the last part of that Halloween special, it wasn't moving, but I could feel an incredible force building up within. And I remember looking at Jay's fingers, and they were trembling, mine were trembling, but it's not moving. We had this expectation that it's going to take off. And when it finally started to move, I could just feel that it was going to do something. It was going to say something. And then all of a sudden, we were told to exit the building, Josh Gates, you can hear him say, "Hey man, we got to cut now. We got to cut now." And so the networks made us leave, and they didn't give me time to close the fucking board down. And so that whole session, that whole buildup, nothing got closed. And 2 days later, I was in the hospital, and I was hospitalized for like 2 weeks. And I developed a double pneumonia. I had a sepsis in my blood. My blood was poisoned. I almost died.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so it was as sick as I've ever been in my entire life. I was damn near put on a respirator, and I was, they said if you don't get better in a few days, then it's not looking good. Your white cell count is weird, and blah blah blah. And so I was just like, man, I wish I would have closed that session. And again, I may have pissed Zach off because I wrote about that. But I mean, I've always just been a truthful guy. I mean, I should have closed the session. I don't blame Zach.
Yeah, he can't be mad at you for telling the truth, or
no,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Right,
but anyway, it's just one of them things, where it's just like, do I really have to walk around with this dark cloud over me all the time, And so it's like I have to be very careful, nowadays, and it's like, and I've been on the board since then. I did it again. I was pretty fascinated with George Edwards that had used boards in the 1950s to summon UFOs. And get this, in 1953, this George guy, and he was an early UFOologist, and he got on a board with his wife and another couple for the sole purpose of talking to UFOs. Well, an entity came through named Z-O. And this is all documented in 1953 or whatever the year was. It's in the early 50s, and it's in the book called Tales from the Saucers Speak by George Williamson. That's his name, and he was just an early pioneer of UFO research. Well, what are the odds of in 1953 a guy gets on the board and something called Zo come through? In the book in 1967, Patterns of Prophecy, the author talks about being semi-possessed by a character that came through called Z, and that's what it said its name was, Z. And so when you begin to look at all these different experiences with Z-O, Oz, it was just a matter of time before this phenomenon, was discovered. And I'm the guy that basically. I'm not the first guy to ever experience it. I'm not the first guy to discover it, but I was the first guy to actually document the similarities and the stories of people, which to this day, if you go to True Ghost, what is the name of it? Unsolvedmysteries.com. If you go to that website and you type in the search criteria and type in Zozo, you'll come to a page which was really done it for me back in the when I came out with my blog in 2009. That was that was what made me come out with my own blog, because it's a collection of Zozo stories that were before I come out with my blog in 2009. And my critics have said, well, if you look at the Google search criteria, that nobody was searching for this until I actually began to talk about it. Therefore, it's bullshit. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? People are just so quick to criticize and dismiss you and scoff at you. I was laughed out of every chat room, paranormal chat room in the country in 2009 when I first started talking about this, until other people came forward. And John Zaffis, whenever, my first radio show was on Darkness Radio with Dave Schrader back in 2009, and I talked about this phenomenon. And then 2 weeks later, John Zaffis came on and said, that during his extensive career as a field demonologist, that name had come up time and time again in his paranormal, investigations. So that gave some, a sense of validity to me when Zaffis came forward and said that he'd heard the name several times. And I always wanted to ask Lorraine Warren if she'd ever heard of it, but it's really not. I've met a lot of people in the paranormal, but unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to meet her. But it's, it was the day she passed last year. I received an SB1 spirit box from Gary Galkin, and so I named my spirit box Lorraine. She was such a sweetheart. I wish I could have met her. But yeah, I was very interested to see what Lorraine Warren would say about that. if it ever came up in any of her investigations, you know, and I've researched them, and I haven't found a case involving that particular entity. But, you know, again, when John Zappis came through and said that he'd heard of it, then that's when it really began to, you know, people's eyebrows began to raise at that point.
Okay. One quick question. When you got sick after using the Ouija board, was that at the most recent one at Zach's Museum?
Yes.
With Josh P. Warren and Josh Gates?
Yeah, it was right after Halloween of 2018 whenever we were all with that Chris Fleming and Joshua Warren and everybody just met on location, you know, Patty Negris and everybody, and which, you know, having met them, we're going to form what we call the Paranormal Paramedics, which was, you know, me, Sister Mary, Brian Ouellette, and Patty Negris. We were actually, you know, working with the Travel Channel to create a new show, and this was right before the pandemic when they accepted, you know, our whole concept, and then we never heard it back. You know, then COVID hit, and then production and everything just, you know, stalled. Mm-hmm. Everything went crazy, and so I'm just we very well may work together in the future, and they're just incredible people. Patty, of course, is nobody's like Patty, you know, and she's just such a vibrant, cool person, you know. And of course, you got Brian Ouellette, the Exorcist, and Sister Mary, you know. So it basically was kind of like a nun, a demonologist, an exorcist, and a witch walk into a bar. And that's exactly what happened after that Ghost Adventure episode was filmed. None of us felt like going to the big after party or whatever that was going on. There was a Halloween party going on after all that, where everybody was invited to. But we decided to go into a little Chinese restaurant and have dinner and have some drinks. And that's how we met after all that. And we remained good friends. And so, you know, and so I will say this. I know we probably don't have a lot of time. I know I've said a lot of things, you know, warnings and this whole Zozo phenomenon. But, you know, if it wasn't for this phenomenon, I wouldn't be with my beautiful fiance. We had a child. He just turned 1 year old, and we named him Zach. His name's Zachary. And so, you know, it's so I can't say that because of this phenomenon that it's all been tragic. You know, I've met people. I've met some really cool people, and I have some really cool relationships with people that I would not have had if it wasn't for this phenomenon. And so I can't say that it's all been bad. So I'm just proud to be able to say that.
Yeah, and it's good that you're finding, you know, the pros to go with the cons, right? Now, you mentioned that John Zappis appeared on Darkness Radio 2 weeks after you had come on the show and told your story, and he validated that, yes, I'm aware of Zozo. And I read in your book that you said you had a few lively conversations with John Zappis. And Eric, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just listening to you guys.
Okay, so I think you know where I'm going with this question. What do you mean?
What Zappis had to say about it?
What do you mean by lively conversations with John Zappis? Did he get? Let me rephrase that. I'll be more direct. Did he get angry with you?
You know, I don't think John's ever been mad at me. I think that we had done a few radio shows together talking about this phenomenon early on, you know, after the Darkness Radio episode. And so there was a lot of tremendous hype flying around at the time. And John he's not one there. He likes to pronounce demonic names. He doesn't like to bring energy and attention to them, even though he lectures about them and he has all this experience. And I run into John last year at Scarefest in Vegas, and we're friends to this day. But we weren't, you know, close where we were just going to sit there and write a book about it like Rosemary and I did. You know, he has a different mindset about things. He believes that it's a deity, you know, and so there's evidence to suggest that perhaps it is a deity being different than an entity or a malevolent entity, you know, so to speak, where a deity may have actually been worshipped sometime in the past and venerated, those types of things, you know. And I'm not on the same league as far as knowledge as you know, John Zappis. He's a haunted collector. He's got a lot more experience than I do. But I do have, you know, I've been in this now for a decade. and I've researched this, and I'm not lying when I say I probably know more about this phenomenon than any other person, that there is. No one's done the research that I have. But here's another weird thing. There was another book written about Zozo by Celine Summers and Tim Wood. And Celine was the main author in that book called Stalked by Zozo. Well, she died last month. And so here we have two Zozo books with two different authors involved that have already passed away since the writing of these books. So it kind of kills, makes me feel pretty bad. There's just, I carry a guilt inside me about this whole phenomenon because I don't want anybody to get hurt.
Yeah, but Darren, you didn't summon the guy on purpose, right? Like you didn't.
No.
Don't blame yourself. That was never your intention. You never.
Well, thank you for saying that, because there's a lot of people that think otherwise, and it gets under my skin sometimes because it looks kind of irresponsible. The way I've gotten on TV and I've used the board, but I've told people, I said, here's what you don't do. And we went through that process. And I'm like, what? It hasn't killed me. I'm 53 years old right now, and it hasn't killed me yet. But it's, I've had a lot of family members pass away this year. I lost my mom. I recently lost my son, who was 28 years old. And his death is still a mystery to us. It was undetermined, how he died. Last year, my brother died in my parents' house in Broken Arrow. And so, in the last 2 years, I've lost most of my family. And so, while I can't and would never attribute any of these deaths, to Zozo, I still, in the back of my mind, got to wonder if I'm cursed, And so I'd like to believe that I'm not. But unfortunately, I am who I am, and I don't do a lot of radio shows anymore. I've stepped away it seems like the farther I step away from the paranormal, the better off my life gets. Mm-hmm. And it's taken me 50 years to figure this out. And so, those opportunities are there, but I don't take them like I used to. I used to be a guy that was just like all over the, making videos and making this and that and filming stuff. I decided when I had Zach that I was going to step away from that, and I'm glad I did. This is the first interview I've probably done in a few months. Because I'm just a truthful guy, and I don't. I'm still having issues with all of this, And when it started in 1982, here we're coming up on 2021. So I've been at this a while, and I've had some bad luck, but things are getting better, and I'm able to talk about it without fear of consequence, Right. I just tell my story, and I think I've done enough research that I definitely have enough research for a follow-up book, but I just don't know if I'll ever write it because it's just not something that I feel is necessary in my life to spend all that time focusing on that. When I've wasted enough of my life doing that. And it's like some people don't understand. They're like, Darren, you could, you should still be aggressive, trying to get a TV. TV isn't that big a deal to me, and I know it kind of is to a lot of people, but for me, I just feel I don't like myself on camera. I don't like the way I look or sound. I'm just one of them guys I'd rather be in the shadows, maybe doing some consultant work or just whatever, but I don't know. It's just hard to explain, but I do feel like, I got to watch, keep myself grounded, keep myself focused and protected, so to speak.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to you. I had a Ouija board experience when I was roughly 19. I'm currently 46 years old. I'm a truthful person too. So, please, I know that I say this with respect. When I first read, there was a little article that I found about you, and I read that first before I read your book. And my first thought was, this guy is full of shit. And then I read your book. And with each passing page, I could not get over the similarities and the synchronicities of what I've gone through. It's so it would take hours for me to even go through it. But I've told the story on the on the air multiple times. I've told it on Jim Harold's Campfire. It's been published in Jim Harold's Campfire Volume 3. It's been published in Tales on a Dark Creepy Night by Joshua P. Warren.
Really?
So if you want to, yeah. And it's called. And
Josh is a good friend of mine.
Here's the thing: he was a good friend of mine too. That's why I was like, Joshua P. Warren, are you kidding me? But here's the deal. So when I had my Ouija board experience, the Ouija board laughed at us. It spelled out H-A-H-A-H-A. And that's actually the title of my story in Joshua's book, It Was a Dark and Creepy Night.
That's what it's on Ghost Adventures, too.
It's the Ouija board, it was laughing at us or something like that. But the point is, when I started reading your book, immediately my mind was blown, because that was the very first time I had ever heard of any other person having the Ouija boards actually spell out H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A. And when it was happening when I was 19, everybody was confused. They didn't understand. I knew exactly what was I knew what that meant. Everybody was like, H-A, what is H-A? And I said, he's laughing, you guys. He's laughing at us. Like, this isn't funny anymore. And I have never heard any other report of anybody using a Ouija board spelling out the laughter until I read your book. And you have got 4 or 5 examples of it in there.
And it's funny you say that, because I've, throughout the last 10, 14 years or whatever, I've had correspondence with hundreds of people that have had Zozo experiences, and nearly every time there's something synchronistic about my experiences and theirs which led them to get a hold of me. And it could be just something like the ha-ha, it could be the rainbow effect, it could be any telltale signature effect of this that compels them to contact me. And in the course of that, I've had to investigate and consult on numerous hauntings, tragedies. There was a guy that was stationed in Afghanistan that was contacting me, having weird Zozo experiences. They were using a board out there out of sheer boredom. He wound up killing himself.
Yeah.
Despite my warnings. So I take it all very seriously, because I've been on the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen what it can do, and so. You'll never convince me that it's just all fun and games, and I did the research, I put it out there. But the thing about it is everybody points to this, this dictionary infernal reference as being the first recorded instance, and it's not. It goes way before that. There was a pope, an early, Franciscan pope, that would have these huge sermons in the 1700s. And this huge crowd, crowds of people would show up at his sermons. And he talked about, several hundred years ago, he mentioned the Mass of Zozo in this sermon. And he said, commune omnium daemonum, which means common to all demons. And so there may be a hint of truth to that. Are we dealing with a pack of entities or demons that are traveling, not unlike wolves? They travel together, and they're able to drop in and surface during these Ouija seances. And so when that happens, what do you do? And I always tell people, close the board. Despite me not having done it, even the last few years, I think it really emphasizes that you're not dealing. And again, does it really matter if we're dealing with external spirits or internal archetypes? Whether or not we're talking to spirits or entities living within our brains, which Crowley said the demons do exist. They exist in our minds.
Right.
There is that correlation. It's like if you don't know what a radio is, and you've never seen a radio, and you see a radio and you hear all the sounds coming out of it, you're going to think that those sounds are originating from that radio, but in fact, it's picking up messages from beyond in the form of radio signals. And what if our minds, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of serial killers and people that committed heinous crimes by saying that they listen to the voices in their head. What if some of these voices that these people hear are some of these entities, whether they be external or in our own subconscious or in our own collective unconscious? What is it that we're channeling that actually influences these people and causes these tragedies and hauntings to happen? We don't know. It's all speculation, and it's all depending on your own experience. So here we go again. People are going to get back on the boards, and they're going to continue to contact me because things start to happen, and I'm not really the guy that can tell you how to make it go away, because I'm still dealing with issues. So it's just it's just a weird set of circumstances, and it remains to be very strange and very personal to me. But that's it. We deal with it. We do what we got to do.
Exactly. So we're running up against the clock here. So do you have a message for any people that might decide to entertain the Ouija board this Halloween?
I would say be careful who you use it with, because it has the ability to detect the weakest link in a crowd of people, or it may just be 3 or 4 people, it may just be 2 people doing the board. But it has the weird ability, even if you're not on the board, it'll find that weakest link, and it'll say something that only that person will realize, and it'll really get under their head and their skin, and it causes things to happen. And so my message, if you get on the board, is to just make sure you're of sound mind. Not if you're on drugs, or if you're drunk, or if you're suicidal or depressed, or any number of afflictions or whatever. Just to be careful. If something comes through at a negative level, close the board, put it up. And if you try it again, if it comes back, then you'll know that you're dealing with something, that you may not understand, or be capable of dealing with. I just tell people to be careful.
Stop. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to stop. Don't do like I did and keep doing it, and keep getting yourself in deeper and deeper into these levels, these Zozo encounter levels, I call them, level 1, level 2, level 3. And they are progressive levels, not unlike the Roman Catholic Church describes demonic possession and oppression.
Right.
It's kind of possession's a very rare phenomenon, but it does happen. But most of the time, you're still aware of who you are, but you change inside, and it happens slowly, and these people become obsessed with it. And you can't become obsessed with talking to invisible entities, because nothing really good is going to ever happen from that, at least not in my experiences.
Same here. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story and your wisdom with the Zozo Phenomenon.
Well, thank you.
And thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope we all have a happy and safe Halloween as best we can, and under the circumstances of the horrible year that is 2020. And until the next episode,
made it through this year, guys. Keep going.
That's right. Until the next episode, stay positive.